Well, look what the cat dragged in. Yeah, it's Hoplite. And you are on the Hoplite channel. We are in a new season. And you are here to see a video that I did not think I would actually have to make. But after much consideration, I have made it, and you are here to see how much democracy can you afford. Yeah, I will of course go into detail as to what I mean by this, but there are rapidly evolving changes happening in the United States, many of which I believe are for the better, and several of which I believe are for the worse. And one in particular gives me grave concern for this country moving forward. And we're going to talk about that. And why I think that the United States is currently at a juncture in its history where we cannot sustain what we currently have as a form of government. And I know that sounds crazy, seeing as how we just had an election in November and a transition of power in January. But there is far too much going on right now that leads me to believe that this is probably America as it's currently constituted in its final years. It's the slow slide into what I think will be eventually a catastrophe, or basically a slow motion catastrophe. So I want to talk today about where I see the future of the country, and I'm going to break off from this channel and form a second channel where I can basically just discuss politics, because this channel, the Hoplite channel, was built right after the COVID pandemic started, and it was an outlet for me to kind of just express my thoughts through the books that I had read, and just sharing my analysis of books. And I still love to read, and I do it often. And I want to go back to more of that content for the Hoplite channel, because I think it's more beneficial that I separate politics, which is very obviously divisive, from just knowledge and reading and things of that nature. So we'll be breaking off into a second channel, and I will announce that possibly in the next video, if not this video. But I want to talk about why I want to break off from the Hoplite channel and form a secondary channel, which will be just dedicated to politics and current events. I'm going to play a video now, and many of you have probably seen it. The recent visit of Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House, being hosted by Donald Trump. And I will go over it after we watch.
I also strongly believe that the Gaza Strip, which has been a symbol of death and destruction for so many decades, and so bad for the people anywhere near it, and especially those who live there, and frankly, who's been really very unlucky. It's been very unlucky. It's been an unlucky place for a long time. Being in its presence just has not been good, and it should not go through a process of rebuilding and occupation by the same people that have really stood there and fought for it and lived there and died there and lived a miserable existence there. Instead, we should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts, and there are many of them that want to do this, and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza, ending the death and destruction and, frankly, bad luck. This can be paid for by neighboring countries of great wealth. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12. It could be numerous sites, or it could be one large site. But the people will be able to live in comfort and peace, and we'll make sure something really spectacular is done. They're going to have peace. They're not going to be shot at and killed and destroyed like this civilization of wonderful people has had to endure. The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
Okay. So there you saw that. It was President Trump making an announcement from the White House with Benjamin Netanyahu standing to his immediate right, listening on. And his statement to the press and the world in general is, I have to say this as an American, it's beyond embarrassing. And I think he was serious. I don't think this was some sort of, gamesmanship. I'm going to make some outrageous, off the wall, just kooky statement and see what the crowd does as far as a reaction, and then I'll reel it in later, and then it'll just be like, oh, I was just kidding. I actually meant this, and I just wanted to see how everyone took it. I think he was serious in his statement about the United States essentially taking Gaza off the hands of the Israelis and leveling it, and then ethnically cleansing Gaza for Israel's benefit and moving potentially 2 million people to some neighboring country who he claims would be more than willing to accept them, because he's talked to everybody and they all agree it's a great idea. And then turning this newly leveled Gaza into like some BS Mediterranean Las Vegas, where there's going to be hotels and condominiums and golf courses, I'm sure, and shopping plazas and strip clubs and liquor stores and whatever. It'll make Dubai jealous, and just the idea of it, like the man, you have to guess, does he have no concept of the history of this place and what those people have gone through for the last 70 some years? And again, the man responsible for turning that place into a demolition site and bombing these people out of their homes, killing tens of thousands, is standing in the room next to him less than 15 feet away. And the guy has an outstanding warrant for his arrest from the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And our president, shamelessly, is giving him everything in the world and more. And I watched the video 3 times, actually, but the second time I watched Netanyahu in particular. And Netanyahu almost kind of squirms, stands up and kind of squirms and looks around like, is this for real? It's almost like Benjamin Netanyahu expected a surprise, got you. You totally believe that. I mean, we saw you. You bought a hook, line, and sinker. He was looking around for a gag video crew to jump out like practical jokers. But when he realized that Trump was going on and getting into detail and being serious, he composes himself again, says well, Mr. President, I've said it many times and I'll say it again, you are the greatest friend Israel ever had. And you better be damn sure of that. No president in U.S. history, I believe, has hosted a war criminal wanted by any international body for war crimes, and then, to make matters worse, pulls his chair out and then pushes his chair in as he sits down to sign the guest book, like he was his freaking waiter. The statement itself was bad enough, but just the posturing and the symbolism was more than I could watch and just stomach. And I think a lot of people agreed. But did Trump really come up with this asinine, just ludicrous idea on his own? And I'm going to say no. There's this rumor that Trump actually hears about a topic and starts to form an opinion but that whoever speaks to him about this particular topic last has the most influence on his opinion. And there's a rumor, of course, rumors, that his son-in-law, who was Jewish, Jared Kushner, spoke to him before he took the stage out there to address the crowd with Netanyahu. Now, where would Jared get this idea from? It's like, well, it's not a new idea. I'm going to read an article that probably suggests where Trump got this idea from, and because his son-in-law suggested it and his daughter probably seconded the idea, he said, yeah, sounds good. I think the American people will love it. I think the world will love it, and once they hear it's coming from me, well, it'll be as good as gold. We'll go to the article. This is the AP from March 19th of 2024, so almost a year ago. Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, praises very valuable potential of Gaza's waterfront property. This is by Meg Kennard, Columbia, South Carolina. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's former White House advisor and son-in-law, praised the very valuable potential of Gaza's waterfront property, suggesting that Israel could remove civilians while it, quote-unquote, cleans up the area. Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable. If people would focus on building up livelihoods, Kushner said in an interview dated February 15th, posted earlier this month on the YouTube channel of the Middle East Initiative, a program of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and reported first on Tuesday by The Guardian. If you think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions, if that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? It's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there, but I think for Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up, Kushner said. But I don't think that Israel has stated that they don't want the people to move back there afterwards. Responding Tuesday on X, those dishonestly using selected parts of his remarks, Kushner posted a video of the entire interaction saying he stood by his comments and believes the Palestinian people's lives will improve only when the international community and their citizenry start demanding accountability from their leadership. About 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering in southern Gaza, in the town of Rafah, as Israel looks to eliminate Hamas following the militant group's deadly October 7th attack. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 70,000 wounded in the Gaza Strip since Israel's war on Hamas began. Yeah, and we know those numbers are way, way, way below actual figures. So yeah, the idea came from Jared Kushner back in March. Well, maybe further back, but we know that Kushner was saying, like, we got all this, like, property in Gaza, like the waterfront is just beautiful. In the Mediterranean, I mean, it could be like Monte Carlo or better. And I think once we move all these people out, from Israel's perspective, right? Not me, I'm not saying this, I'm saying if I was Israel, right? You understand, right? So if we move these people out and clean it up, like, so much could be done with it. So Trump hears this and probably thinks like, yeah, I mean, if I could move all these people out and send them to somebody else's country to be their problem, and they could, build huts or, cabins or whatever for them, their lives would get better, right? Because, well, Netanyahu would not be dropping bombs on their heads anymore. And then we would develop this beautiful stretch of land and like turn into, Disney World. The problem is Jared Kushner is not looking at this like Donald Trump. Jared Kushner is Chabad Lubavitch, a denomination of Judaism. They believe that in order for a biblical prophecy to be fulfilled, the entire landmass of Israel must be 100% Israeli Jewish. And that's where Netanyahu held up that big poster at the UN, which should have been an alarm bell for everybody, about the future Middle East, right? The Greater Israel Project. Expansionism, annexation, colonialism. And Kushner believes through his faith that this will fulfill some prophecy and that the Moshiach, which is their version of the Messiah, will finally come to earth and everybody will be saved. But we know that it's lunacy to believe that this is going to happen in the real world. That 1.8 million people, which by the way, prior to the war, after October 7th, and I call it war loosely, there were over 2 million Palestinians. So you know that there are 200,000 people that are probably missing in general. And many of whom are probably underneath that quote-unquote demolition site that Donald Trump spoke of. So how is the Arab world dealing with this new news that Donald Trump is going to essentially displace and ethnically cleanse Gaza, and that neighboring countries will take them in? Well, let's find out. This is from Zero Hedge. Today, red line. Trump's Gaza takeover plan has united the Arab world more than ever. As predicted, President Trump's controversial calls for the U.S. to take over the Gaza Strip is for the first time in many years uniting Arab world and its leadership more than ever. Ultra-provocative plans have been floated from the administration over the past days, including reportedly the idea of setting up a Palestinian state inside Saudi Arabia or elsewhere in northern Africa. Israeli media has even listed the African states of Morocco and the Puntland state of Somalia as places where Palestinians from the Gaza Strip could be expelled. The secessionist Republic of Somaliland was specifically named in a Channel 12 report, but this hasn't come directly from the U.S. administration per se. Naturally, this is going to inflame Muslim sentiment in the region. Egypt has been among the first influential Arab and North African states to blast the Trump plan while expressing solidarity with Saudi Arabia. Egypt condemned on Sunday as irresponsible statements by Israeli officials suggesting establishing a Palestinian state on Saudi territory, according to a statement by Egypt's foreign ministry. The foreign ministry said it considered that suggestion a direct infringement of Saudi sovereignty, adding that the kingdom's security was a red line for Egypt. Of course, Riyadh swiftly condemned the plan, saying it will remain unwavering on the question of full Palestinian sovereignty. It said it will never normalize relations with Israel if Palestinians are expelled from Gaza. Without doubt, this is going to greatly complicate U.S. relations with Saudis and make things harder for the Trump policy in the whole Arab world. As one regional news source described, the headlines across Saudi Arabia this week have been, by all accounts, as firm and unwavering as the kingdom's official position on Gaza, rejecting outright any normalization process with Israel without a Palestinian state in the equation. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday, alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, told reporters that Riyadh no longer has the precondition of a Palestinian state in order to open up diplomatic relations with Israel. A short time later, Trump made the stunning announcement the U.S. would expel Gaza's residents to the nearby countries and then take over the enclave and turn it into a beach resort. Within minutes, 4 a.m. local time, Saudi Arabia issued a statement rejecting the entire premise. The Palestinian state is not the subject of negotiation or concessions, read the headline in Saudi's Al Watan newspaper, citing the foreign ministry. Since then, other Arab League members have agreed and expressed outrage and condemnation. Jordan, too, has rejected all calls to absorb hundreds of thousands more Palestinians. Trump has been specifically pressuring Egypt and Jordan to take in the Gaza Strip's 1 million plus Palestinians. But the reality is that it will simply be a non-starter, practically impossible, without Arab support. The Arabs, in turn, have blasted this as a brazen and open ethnic cleansing campaign of historic and sovereign territory. The UN has also issued such condemnations. Well, there you have that. The Arab nations around the area that will be affected, Israel and Gaza, has said not just no, but hell no. So Donald Trump now looks like a complete buffoon on the world stage for saying this when he obviously did not discuss this with the foreign leaders of the Arab League and the Arab nations that allegedly would take in these refugees from Gaza after the U.S., quote-unquote, cleaned it up and bulldozed and expelled these people. Yeah. And what did Trump do to rub salt in this wound? Well, there's an article about that regarding the United Nations Human Relations Commission. And this is from the NPR article dated February 4th. Trump withdraws the U.S. from the UN Human Rights Council. President Trump has signed an executive order pulling the U.S. out of the UN Human Rights Council. Quote, I've always felt the UN has tremendous potential. It's not living up to that potential right now, he said Tuesday afternoon at a White House signing ceremony. During his first term as president, Trump also cut ties with the UNHRC, an organization the U.S. leaders from both parties have long said has a bias against Israel. The order also cut future funding to the UN Relief and Works Agency, which provides aid to Palestinians. The Biden administration paused funding to UNRWA while the war between Israel and Hamas was ongoing, after accusations from Israel that some staffers from the agency had ties to Hamas. but an independent review found there were no evidence to go back that up. UNRWA is the main agency providing relief to Palestinians in Gaza. Yeah. So, not only did Donald Trump host Benjamin Netanyahu, a war criminal wanted by the ICC, he signs an executive order telling the world that the U.S. is withdrawing from the United Nations Human Rights Council. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has been critical of Israel and their constant bombardment of civilians in Gaza. So not only is he hosting the war criminal, he's withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council that has been critical of Israel, and this other UNRWA, which has actually provided funding so that Palestinians can literally survive day to day in Gaza. So he's withdrawing the US from this council. Israel, by the way, withdrew, I think, the same day or the day after. And he's going to keep the UNRWA from getting US funding to basically keep Palestinian civilians alive in Gaza. So he's doubling down on it. But was he done there? Oh no. Third article coming up. Yahoo News, February 7th, on Friday. International ire over Trump sanctioning the ICC. The International Criminal Court and dozens of countries on Friday condemned sanctions imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump over probes targeting America and Israel as a threat to, quote, law-based international order. The UN and EU urged Trump to reverse the asset freezes and travel bans against ICC officials, employees and their families, and anyone deemed to have helped ICC investigations. U.S. allies, including Britain, France, and Canada, were among 79 of the 125 ICC member states who said the U.S. action, quote, could jeopardize the safety of victims, witnesses, and court officials. Trump on Thursday signed an executive order saying that the court, which was founded in 2002 to investigate genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, had, quote, abused its power by issuing an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who held talks with the president on Tuesday. The ICC, which is based in The Hague, said the sanctions sought to harm its independent and impartial judicial work. It vowed to stand firmly with staff, providing justice and hope to millions of innocent victims and atrocities across the world. Court President Tomoko Okane said such threats and coercive measures constitute serious attacks against the court, states, parties, the rule of law, based international order, and millions of victims. It undermines the justice system. The UN urged Trump to reverse the move. The court should be fully able to undertake its independent work. UN Human Rights Office spokeswoman Ravina Shamdasani said in an emailed statement, the rule of law remains essential to our collective peace and security. Seeking accountability globally makes the world a safer place for everyone. Antonio Costa, who heads the EU Council representing the EU's 27 member states, wrote on X that the move, quote, undermines the international criminal justice system. The EU Commission expressed regret and stressed the ICC's key importance in upholding international criminal justice and the fight against impunity. Yeah. So Trump did that too. Hosted Netanyahu, wanted by the International Criminal Court, outstanding warrant. Trump withdraws the U.S. from the UN Human Rights Council and then sanctions the very court that has leveled charges against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, for their atrocities against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Donald Trump was elected because he ran on an America First platform. Can somebody explain to me how any of this is America First, or even America Second, or involves America in any way, shape, manner, or form? This is why I believe the United States is on borrowed time as a democracy. And I want to make it clear because I wrote this quote down, and I want to put it up for you right now, and I'm going to read it because it just came to my mind. It's an original, but I think it rings true, and let me know if you agree. The Achilles heel of democracy, the influence of money. Once a well-organized group sharing a common interest discovers the price tag needed to control the votes of a majority in a particular government, that democracy is captured and no longer serves the people. And that's a Hoplite original. But I'm sure many different, people throughout history have echoed a similar sentiment. And it's the influence of money. It is the influence of people that have a large sum of money that share a common interest together. And in this case, it's clear that the interest is the state of Israel. This is going to damage the reputation and the credibility of the United States on the global stage for years and years to come if Donald Trump is foolish enough to try and pursue this idea of displacing 2 million people, shooing them off to some neighboring country, assuming those people will take those refugees, and then bulldozing the last strip of land these people called home to turn it into a resort. How callous and tone deaf a thing can you imagine? But why is this happening? And it's because I believe Donald Trump, for all of the positive things about him and what he's doing for America, suffers from this Achilles heel of democracy. He has fallen under the influence of a group that shares a common interest, are motivated, and are well funded to make it happen. And this is what happens to democracies throughout history. This is how they end, and it is through corruption, when they no longer serve the people. Okay? Democracy. Demokratia, which is ancient Greek of rule of the people. Makes sense, right? The people are the sovereigns, the people rule. We in America have a Republican form of democracy. We have over 300 million people, therefore it cannot be a direct democracy because you can't have 300 million people saying how they want to do things. Everybody elects a representative, and those representatives go to a governing body and then vote on behalf of who they represent. It's a much more efficient way of doing things. It's how we've done things in America since the start. But what's the problem? The average lifespan of democracies, historically speaking, is about 200 years. I wonder if you knew that. The United States, this year in July, will be 249 years old. So we are, above the average, but we're not that far away. Why? Well, because of what happened in the last 100 years, 120 years, the United States emerged victorious after World War I, even though technically we had a smaller role in that war, but more importantly, World War II. In the post-World War II globe, the global sphere of politics, the United States emerged as a superpower, okay? And after the Cold War ended, we were the sole superpower. And we had a nuclear arsenal that could not be matched. So what did the United States do? Did we build? Did we spread that wealth and that good fortune? No, we sought to exercise our will on the world and impose what we believed should be the world order. And that's starting to decay because the United States is finding that nothing lasts forever. And democracies, having a 200-year average lifespan, can and do end. What's the cost of running a presidential campaign in the modern era? Well, I found out that it's just around $1 billion. Think about that. If you were George Washington or John Adams or Thomas Jefferson and you were running for president and your opponent brought $1 billion to the table to run against you, $1 billion back then, by the way, would have bought a continent. But let's say $1 million, like something like akin to their time. They would understand that now, like their system of government they have set up had been so infiltrated by money that it was impossible for the common man to elect someone of adequate representation. That somebody who was going to represent them would come under the influence of this money, because you cannot secure $1 billion without owing 1,000 people, each individual, a favor. And that's the issue, is that with super PACs and private donors and lobbyists, you inevitably create a system that cannot be anything but corrupt. And you are seeing it now unfortunately, in a very crude and shameful way, in Donald Trump hosting a wanted war criminal in the White House and then suggesting to the world the mess he made, we'll take care of it. We'll clean it up. Oh, and then we're going to bulldoze that mess, and then we're going to turn it into a resort. Let me ask you something. Do you think that the United States is going to be able to hold on to Gaza from, across the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean? Do you think the United States wants to actually foot the bill for what it will cost to maintain and keep that? Do you think Israel is not going to say to them, okay, now that you've settled that problem we had with the Palestinians, we'll take it from here? And the same people, the private donors, the super PACs, and the influential kingmakers with the money in their pockets, they have the common interest, and it's not America. The common interest for them is Israel. And they will see to it that if that plan does go the distance, that land, Gaza, will be turned over to Israel, as Jared Kushner suggested. Gaza will not be America. It will not be, a province. We would effectively clean out, bulldoze, and terraform Gaza for Israel, free of charge, of course. And then Israelis would go on to essentially colonize, settle it, and create new neighborhoods there. And once that's over and done with, they will then turn their attention to the West Bank. And that's coming next. You take that to the bank. That's coming next. The Greater Israel Project will then turn its attention to the West Bank and southern Lebanon, and then further out. So there will be nowhere left for these people to go in that area. They will literally have to travel 1,000 miles away to finally find a place to call home. Or they can just firmly plant their feet in the ground like they've always done and said, make me move. You'll have to kill every last one of us and bear that burden around your neck if that's what you want. And why do I say the U.S. can't do this, and why this would essentially be a project for Israel? It's like, well, the U.S. has $36.4 trillion of its own debt, and we have $80 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So we have over $100 trillion in money that will, let's face it, never be paid back. So the U.S. is literally existing on the threat of its military might. And I disagree with Niccolo Machiavelli here, but you can only threaten people with violence for so long. If all you have is the threat of violence to offer them, eventually they will push back and they say, go ahead and do it then. Eventually, human beings, when they have nowhere else to go and no place left to hide, and they have to face either certain death or freedom, they will push back on their oppressors and they will say, go ahead and do it. And if enough people, like I mentioned in that article, in the Arab world, join arms, lock together, put aside their differences and say, this is as far as you go no further, then the U.S. has no more credibility and will literally have to wage war to exert its will on the rest of the world. And that will create a regional war and then potentially a third world war, because China, Russia, and every other country that has wanted to get even with the United States will get in. And they will wage a proxy war against the United States the way we have waged a proxy war against Russia via Ukraine. That will happen. Gaza, West Bank, will become Vietnam 2.0 for America if we are stupid enough to try to enforce this policy, which is why I don't think it will happen. But nevertheless, it's out there. It's Donald Trump, he threw that paper plane across the classroom and everybody saw it. What else is wrong with the United States where this plan in Gaza will be unworkable for us? Illegal immigration, another reason Donald Trump was elected. We have basically 30 million people in this country right now who are here illegally. I say 30 million as a round figure. It could be more, it could be less. It's around that. To deport these 30 million illegals, you would have to deport 20,547 human beings per day, every day, without stopping for 4 straight years. That's a lot of work. That's a massive undertaking. I know right now there are massive deportation operations taking place. We're going after the worst of the worst, but let's face it, if 30 million illegal immigrants aren't fully deported to the last man, woman, and child, then the understanding will be that if you are an illegal immigrant and you make it in the United States and you can keep your head down long enough and avoid the police, you'll eventually get, the go-ahead to stay. And when another political party comes into power, they will eventually have enough votes, grant a blanket amnesty, and then we're home free. That will destroy the United States too, because what do you think that's going to do to the debt? When you have all of the world's people who think the United States is a playground, someone's mansion, that as long as they can crash on the couch long enough, they eventually become permanent residents. So I want to ask a question that has to be asked, and the reason I'm going to fork this channel is, are Americans ready for USA 2.0? And I put a little symbol down there as to where I suggest that this goes. Our government is beholden to a very wealthy and motivated group of people that have one particular special interest. And Donald Trump, without telling you directly who that group is and what their special interest is he's effectively telling you by his actions. None of this bullshit with Gaza, with the Palestinians, with the ICC, with the UN Human Rights Council, none of this is for the United States. We derive no benefit from this. This will cost us money. If we commit troops, those troops will be shot at and many of them will be killed. And the United States, even if we succeed in this crazy endeavor, will be considered aiders and abettors of a genocidal country. And that is how history will remember the United States at its end. Because I do believe that will usher in the end of the United States as a democratic republic. Because the people then, without a doubt, can know that our government does not represent us. Now, the good that Donald Trump is doing right now is he's showing how much waste, fraud, and abuse we have in our government versus in the US AID project, which was, I guess, started by JFK back in the day to see to it that US foreign policy was reinforced with monetary aid for countries or for groups that the US government deemed worthy of receiving said aid. Little did we know, over the course of the last 50 years, it essentially became a dark money slush fund for the CIA and other nefarious groups in the US government to use to kick off new wars, to overthrow governments, and to potentially fund false flag operations that would keep the United States at the top of the heap and destabilize our enemies and the regions they live in. And that's all we've done for the past 30-some years in the Middle East, is destabilize the region. The war on terror now, I think it's obvious to see that it was probably also being done on behalf of the State of Israel, to destabilize Iraq, to destabilize the area between Iran and Israel, so that the United States would have a permanent military presence in that region and that could come to the aid of Israel if they ever so needed it. And the war on terror was used to justify that U.S. military intervention. And after 17 years, with nothing but lost money and lost blood to show for it, we withdrew from Afghanistan and left behind billions of dollars of equipment. And that war was the longest in U.S. history, and it yielded us less than nothing. It yielded us more debt, and it yielded us more people in the world who hated us. And it yielded more people who would be willing to turn to extremism and quote-unquote acts of terror if it meant getting even with the United States and Israel. That's all the war on terror got us, was more terror. And this insane idea of the U.S. going into Gaza to make it a resort and kick out 2 million people that have called it their ancestral home. I mean, if you want to talk about the Middle East having bad blood with the U.S., go ahead and try that. Go ahead and send U.S. Marines or U.S. military, Army, fly warplanes overhead and try to police these people on a trail of tears, which is what it will be, out of Gaza into Egypt or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or wherever, and then just say, shoo. And then as the cameras roll, military goes back to Gaza, and then you bring in construction crews and start to bulldoze and steamroll fresh concrete and asphalt down over what remained of those people's lives. I can't think of a more ugly image for the world to see representing U.S. foreign policy. But then again, the war on terror and the U.S.'s approach to that was also an ugly part of our history too. So who knows? But I think America, as a democracy, a Republican democracy, is just about over. And Donald Trump's actions are sad, but in a good way, showing the world, and more importantly, the American people, that, yeah, your government doesn't work for you. How much democracy can you afford, American? Not so much? Well, that's too bad, because I need $1 billion to be president. And I want to work for you, but I need that Billy. And if you don't have it, there's a group of people who do. And once they give me that money, they're going to get their favors done for them. And yes, of course, I'm going to make America great again, and your life's going to get better. But, there's a system here, and the pecking order is going to be based upon the donations. And I hate to tell you this, but if your interests conflict with the donations of more wealthy people, then your interests will get kicked down the ladder. And that's just the way we do business here in Washington, D.C. And I think the American people now are getting fed up with it. And there's an article that came out, I want to say a month ago, maybe less, that the Zoomer generation, I mean, we have Gen Alpha, so the Zoomer generation is like the second youngest, but the Zoomer generation is actually more in favor now of a benevolent dictatorship taking over their country than they are willing to see their current form of government continue on in the future. And that's saying something. If the younger generation is so fed up and their lives are so miserable and they see how their countries are perceived abroad, that they want a benevolent dictatorship to come in and just turn things upside down and shake it all out, then you know things are getting bad. And that's going to be the premise of my next channel, is that I think America needs to move into a new period where we talk about the legitimate, and I do mean legitimate, imposition of a fascistic governmental system in the United States. And we rid ourselves of these special interest groups, we rid ourselves of the corrupt money system, and that an individual with sole authority to administer the powers of the state unilaterally will do so for the benefit of his people and only his people, and truly for their benefit, not just among a series of people that seek to benefit them and them alone. And it's a reason why Julius Caesar was such a popular figure. He seized power. Some would say he seized it illegally. But despite him doing that, he became such a popular figure among both the rich and poor classes, they hailed him as a hero. And thus began the age of the Caesars in ancient Rome, the ancient Roman Empire. It was its glory days. And then eventually it fell back into a republic, and then eventually it decayed and died. And, history repeated itself in the United States, I believe. But yeah, 200 years is the average lifespan of a democracy. We are 50 years beyond that average. I don't like our odds, okay? Just because you live in a system and your parents lived in that system and your grandparents lived in that system does not mean that that system cannot one day end. Okay, you have to look at history on a century by century timeline. You can't look at it as a decade by decade timeline. I mean, it's good to go back and look at history decade by decade and you'll make sense of your century, but historically, it makes more sense to look at eras in terms of 100 years here, 100 years, and 100 years there. And once you're outside of two eras, 2 centuries, chances are the democracy that existed in the previous 2 eras is gone, either overthrown or reconstituted into some other form of government, if that nation persisted. But I just felt like I had to do this video because I had a lot of hope for Donald Trump in his second term. And I was nervous because the last video I did on this channel was right before the election. And I was like, okay, 50-50. If Kamala Harris gets in, then you know what to expect because we've been living, through that hell the last 4 years. If Donald Trump comes back, I think he's going to come to Washington, D.C. with a hatchet in his hand and he's looking to take scalps. And yeah, we have seen a lot of that. But this display last week with Netanyahu in the White House and President Trump literally rolling out the red carpet for him and doing all of these executive orders exclusively for his benefit, Netanyahu's benefit, and the nation of Israel, there is nothing America first about that. There is no explanation for that behavior other than he's being told this is what you have to do because you owe these people. And that's a president who does not have autonomy for his people. That is a president who is compromised in that one regard for that country and for their people. And in my book, that's unacceptable. I don't want good enough as an American. I want the very best. And if America is the very best, we should have the very best. And this constant dichotomy of, well, this guy's better than this guy, so what are you going to do? You're going to vote third party? Good luck, dude. That should end. Okay? You being stuck between two decisions of crap and then, cold crap. It's like, well, I guess if I'm going to have crap, I'd rather it be warm than cold. And that's now, my life is whenever every 4 years I had to decide between what flavor of crap I get to choose. You should not have to accept that. You should have a representative government, whether it be in the form of one person or in a Congress of people who look out for your interests exclusively. And the reason they don't is because, in my statement, the Achilles heel of democracies, once influential money finds its way into the system and discovers the price tag of what it means to control a majority of that government, that democracy is forever over, so long as that special interest has the money to afford that price tag. And so far they have. And that's where we are. I hate to be a downer about it, but there is a silver lining here in that you don't have to live in this system. You don't have to accept garbage. If the people are the sovereigns in this democracy, the rule of the people, then you 100% have the right to say, no, I'm in favor of a fascistic system now. And I will vote in favor of one-person rule, and I want that person to go to our capital with a mandate in hand. And that is, he will rid our government of all corruption and will do so unimpeded, meaning he can defy the courts. He can ignore the Congress. Okay? He can ignore every single person and be the supreme authority over our government to right all of the wrongs that have persisted in our government the last, let's say, 50 to 100 years, because it took a while to get here. But this corruption now is so rife that short of a seismic shift in how our country is run, it will never change. And it will be a slow motion skid to the bottom where we will crash. And then all of the countries that have had to live under the yoke of American hegemony will seek their revenge and will seek to get even. And they are. Do not think that Russia, right now, fighting this war in Ukraine, has not taken this very personally. They're being very stoic about it, but they're losing their sons, their fathers, their husbands, their cousins, their nephews to this war. It's possible that men who fought in World War II are watching their grandsons die. And they know that their grandsons probably wouldn't be dying but for the United States promoting and perpetuating this war in Ukraine. And allegedly, the United States aided the Soviet Union in World War II. Yesterday's friends become tomorrow's enemies and vice versa, right? These countries will remember. They have long memories. And this fiasco that's developing over Gaza right now is a non-starter. And I really do hope that after, Netanyahu went home and Trump really thought about what he said, he will no longer pursue this. Because, let's face it, it's not going anywhere. Okay, I'll leave it here. The dogs are barking, but I appreciate you tuning in for this, and we'll catch you next time.